Boldwood presents Snow Angels on the Boardwalk, written by Georgina Troy and read by Sophie Dora Hall. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. London. Portia. Portia leant against her white quartz kitchen worktop as she took a sip from her steaming coffee. Even with Charlie's back to her, she couldn't miss the tension in his shoulders as he gathered up his laptop and pushed it into his rucksack. "Are you sure you're all right, Charlie?" she asked for the second time that morning. "If only you'd confide in me about what's bothering you, I'm sure we could find a way to work things out." He closed the zip on the top of the bag and, leaving it on the table, turned to her. "I'm fine, honestly." Portia wished he was being truthful, but noticed that the smile he now gave her as he took her in his arms didn't quite reach his beautiful blue eyes. Suspecting he was concerned about upsetting her, Portia held her coffee cup to one side as she returned his kiss. "Are you unhappy living in London? Please stop worrying about me." He kissed the tip of her nose. "I'd better get a move on or I'll be late, and we have a couple of early bookings at the restaurant. I'll see you later." He stepped away and, lifting his bag, hung one of the straps over his right shoulder. "Would you like me to fetch anything special for supper tonight?" Portia shook her head, swallowing a mouthful of coffee to be able to speak without crying. Ever since their first kiss at the Burns night party at the hotel where Charlie used to work in Jersey, the pair of them had been inseparable. For the past few months, though, she had felt him becoming more distant, even though he tried hard to hide it. She loved Charlie so much, but sensed he was becoming more miserable each day. "We could go out somewhere to eat if you'd rather." It was a pathetic attempt to cheer him up, and Portia suspected she needed to do much better if she wasn't going to lose him completely. The thought terrified her. Ever since she and Charlie had come together, the speed and intensity of their relationship had surprised them both, but especially Portia. She had been struggling to come to terms with losing her fiancé, Alistair, 2 years before, and never imagined she would fall in love with anyone again, let alone feel as if she had been slammed by a thunderbolt when she and Charlie noticed each other at the party that first night. "If you like." Portia took a moment to recall her question. "Charlie?" He turned to face her, an expectant look on his handsome face. "Yes? We are okay, aren't we?" His shoulders drooped slightly, and her heart dipped. "Of course we are." She was losing him. She just knew it. Not wishing to ever be that needy girlfriend. "I'll see you later." Portia watched him leave, and as he closed the front door to the flat, she sighed. How was she going to resolve what had gone wrong between them? She still loved him as fiercely as she had ever done, but Charlie clearly wasn't happy. Not that he would ever admit it. How could she make things better with him if she didn't have any idea what was wrong? She thought back to how exciting life had been when she and Charlie were first together. He loved his job working as an assistant hotel manager near the Boardwalk in Jersey, but gave it up willingly to follow her to London, she recalled wistfully. Maybe he simply hated managing the restaurant in London. Or was it more than that? A terrible thought occurred to her. Maybe it was their relationship making him miserable. She finished her drink and then, trying to avert her thoughts to more cheerful matters, decided she had better hurry if she wasn't going to be late to her stint at one of the 2 charities where she was a committee member, helping to arrange fundraising events. Portia loved living in Chelsea and had desperately wanted to believe Charlie when he assured her several days ago that he was happy there. Although they had met in Jersey, he had grown up in New Zealand after his parents moved there when he was small, but only the previous week he had promised her he didn't feel the need to return there for a while. How was it already 11 months since he had moved from Jersey to live with her in London? The time had flown by, and Portia knew the first 5 of those months had been the happiest in her life. His too, he had said, and she believed him. As she checked her makeup in her compact mirror, she tried to recall any subtle changes between them and when they had appeared. Towards the end of summer, she reminded herself, applying her favourite lipstick carefully. Yes, that was when it had become increasingly clear to her that Charlie was becoming despondent. Maybe it was the heat of living in a city at the height of summer he hadn't liked. "There's no breeze here," she recalled him complaining one sultry July night, when she had woken to find his side of the bed empty and Charlie sitting silently on the rooftop terrace, staring out over the London skyline. There won't be. She had been momentarily confused by his comment, then recalled how Charlie's summers had been spent near the seafront either in New Zealand or Jersey. We're nowhere near the sea here in London. I understand that, he had replied thoughtfully. I suppose I just hadn't expected it to feel so airless here at times. Isn't it like that in the summer on the island, though? She had asked, confused. Not really. Even during heat waves, there's always a freshness to the air, especially where I live near the beach. Something seemed to shift in him then. She was certain of it. He's missing Jersey, Portia murmured, surprised not to have worked out the reason before. Of course that's it. City life wasn't for everyone, but when Charlie had first moved to London to live with her, he had seemed entranced to discover the lively nightclubs, attend opening nights at theatres, go to concerts at the Royal Albert Hall, and accompany Portia. She smiled, remembering how he especially enjoyed going with her to smaller, more intimate clubs Portia had introduced him to. Was she wrong to have believed him to be as happy as her back then? Satisfied to have resolved the mystery, she pulled on her new camel coat and, picking up her favourite handbag, left the flat. After her meeting, she returned home, choosing to walk instead of taking a cab. She wanted time to think things through properly, and chatting to a cabbie wasn't going to offer her the solitude she desperately needed. She supposed Charlie hadn't wanted to upset her by admitting anything was wrong. How typical of her darling Charlie to be more concerned by her happiness than his own. But if he wouldn't tell her what was wrong, how could she possibly help put things right? And, she pondered, as she entered the building and went to press the button for the lift, even if he did talk openly to her about his feelings, was she ready to do whatever it took to see him truly smiling again? Yes, she decided. Of course she was. She needed to think about what to do next. She covered her mouth as she yawned, annoyed after another night when she had quickly fallen asleep, only to wake at 3 a.m, her mind racing, after a nightmare where first Alistair vanished, then Charlie. Her heart raced as she recalled her desperate attempts to reach them both. She folded her arms across her chest, willing her breathing to calm, aware she didn't have the strength to face the acute pain of loss again in her life. She had barely survived it the first time, and the fear that it could happen again with Charlie threatened to overwhelm her. The lift stopped 2 floors down from hers. The doors opened, and a smart blonde woman around her age stepped inside. Portia fixed a smile onto her face, not wishing anyone to see her distress. The woman checked the lift was going to the ground floor, and not wishing to correct her, Portia nodded. Portia? The woman beamed at her. It is you, isn't it? Wondering how much worse her day was going to get, Portia struggled to place the woman for a moment, before realising that they had attended the same boarding school. The woman's hair was much lighter than it had been when they were pupils together, and she was several sizes slimmer, but her enthusiastic manner hadn't changed. Venetia Adams? It's night now. Venetia beamed at Portia, clearly delighted to have been recognised. You don't live here, do you? Portia nodded. It embarrassed her to meet ex-pupils who remembered her from those miserable days when her parents went through their acrimonious divorce, even leaving her at boarding school at times during the holidays, unless friends invited her to stay with them. Had Venetia been one of those people whose parents had taken pity on her? No, they weren't, she concluded with relief. I do, as a matter of fact. You? Venetia shook her head, looking frustrated. I wish. I've just been... The agent told me as soon as I arrived that an offer had been accepted only 10 minutes before. Oh, that's a shame. Portia was sorry to hear of her disappointment. Couldn't they have called to save you the trouble of coming, especially on such a cold day? You would think so. But he seemed more interested in showing me details of 2 other flats nearby. I imagine he hoped to show me instead. It's here that I'd set my heart on living, though. Venetia pursed her lips. Toby, my husband, has always wanted a flat here ever since he stayed with one of his friends years ago. I had every intention of making an offer today. I was hoping to surprise him. Portia didn't have the heart to leave her disappointed friend without at least trying to help cheer her up. She considered inviting Venetia to her penthouse for coffee, changing her mind almost immediately in case she added further disappointment to her. Portia reconsidered her options. If you've got time, we could always go for a coffee. You can tell me all about your husband and how your life has been since we were at school." The other woman smiled. "I'd love that. I need to come to terms with losing the flat before I go home anyway. Toby is working from his home office most of the time now, and I need to at least try and appear positive about our flat hunting before seeing him. And," she said, placing a hand on Portia's forearm, "it will be wonderful to catch up with you after all this time." Several minutes later, they settled down in the warm, cosy coffee shop Portia liked to visit several times each week, and gave their orders. "So, you mentioned that you're married," Portia said, hoping to turn the conversation to something more cheery. "Recently?" She listened as Venetia told her about meeting her husband, and knowing within moments that he was the one. The wedding sounded magical, as did their life together, and Portia realised that the only thing marring Venetia's happiness was not living in their chosen building. "If you ever decide to move, you will give me first refusal," Venetia said, leaning closer, her piercing eyes boring into Portia's. "Yes," Portia agreed, "but I can't see that happening any time soon. I love living there, and don't see me wanting to move." "But you never know." Portia laughed, reminding herself that she was aiming to cheer her friend and not dash yet another hope. "Of course. In fact, let's swap numbers now so that you have mine just in case." Portia struggled not to smile, remembering Venetia's determination, which clearly hadn't lessened with age. Having done as Venetia asked, Portia sat back to drink her coffee, listening as the other woman chattered on and on about her life, her wonderful husband, and giving up work because she was reaching burnout. "I'm lucky Toby has done so well for himself," she confided. "Thankfully, there's no need for me to earn a living anymore." She glanced around, then, lowering her voice, added, "I hated working in finance, although it probably didn't help that I wasn't very good at it." Portia seemed to recall Venetia struggling during maths lessons at school, and barely hit her. "Was it very stressful?" Venetia's face clouded over for a second before she regained her composure. "I was losing sleep and weight, and it must have been about 18 months ago when Toby caught me sobbing in our room." "That's horrible." "I was at my wit's end, but the darling man comforted me and insisted I give notice straight away and take off for a while until I felt strong enough to return. Thankfully, since then he has begun to do incredibly well, and there's no need for me to find another job." Portia couldn't miss the relief on Venetia's face. "I'm glad." "So am I. It's why I've been able to look for somewhere new for us," she sighed. "I had imagined I'd be arranging decorators in the next couple of months, but now someone else's offer was accepted that clearly won't be happening." They talked for a bit longer, until Venetia's phone pinged. She picked it up and studied the screen. "Damn, it's Toby. He wants to know whether our offer was accepted. I suppose I can't put off going home and telling him what's happened any longer." Portia pulled a sympathetic face. "Good luck. And you never know. Another one of the flats might come up for sale soon." She doubted it. The residents mostly seemed to have lived there for years as far as she was aware. Portia noticed Venetia's uncertain expression. "I promise I'll let you know if I do hear anything." "Thank you." Venetia finished her coffee and pulled on her coat. "It was good to see you again. If I didn't say so before, you're looking amazing, but then you always did. It was girls like me who took years to work out how to make the best of themselves." Portia wasn't sure what to say to that comment, so simply smiled. "It's been great catching up with you." She watched Venetia leave. As Portia was alone again, her thoughts returned to Charlie and her mood plummeted. She loved him so much and couldn't bear for him to be miserable. But what could she do to change things? She finished her drink and left to walk the short way home. What was the point of only one of them being happy? And how could she possibly enjoy life if her sweet Charlie didn't share that happiness? The light had disappeared from his beautiful blue eyes, and as much as he insisted everything was all right, Portia knew it wasn't. He had given their life in London his best shot, but it was clear to her that the place was too noisy and hectic for an islander like Charlie. She hated to think of him yearning for the tranquility of his old life back in Jersey. As she stood in the lift going up to her flat, she thought of Venetia. Maybe bumping into her had been a sign. Portia tried to work out how exactly, but couldn't come up with anything. She unlocked her front door and stepped inside. Closing it, Portia remembered the first time she had stepped into Oliver's fisherman's cottage in Jersey, and how safe and protected being there had made her feel. It was the 2nd anniversary of her late fiancé's death, and having lost contact, she knew the only person who could offer her the support she craved was Alistair's brother, Oliver. She had flown to Jersey desperate to be with another person who would understand the heartache of her reality. Portia thought back to how friendly the locals had been, welcoming her into their group of friends, their kindness acting like a salve for the loss that was still so raw. And then she had met her darling Charlie, and been overwhelmed by their instant mutual attraction. Portia gasped. Why hadn't she thought of this before? If going to the island had been the balm her spirit had needed the previous year, then surely it would be the perfect way to perk Charlie up now, wouldn't it? She placed her bag on the hall table, accidentally knocking over a silver-framed photo of her and her friend Cressida. They had been very close once, she mused. She picked up the photo and thought back to when it had been taken years before, on the night she met Alistair. Staring at it, Portia couldn't help reminiscing how life had seemed more carefree back then. How lousy of a friend was she thought, realising she hadn't spent any time with Cressida since Charlie had moved in with her. Putting the photo back onto the table, her thoughts returned to Charlie. She might have lost touch with her friend, all of her friends in fact, she thought guiltily, but Charlie's happiness and their relationship was her priority now, and she needed to think how best to help him. A bird fluttered before settling on the windowsill, drawing her attention to the deep blue of the sky, and it dawned on her exactly what she needed to do. Taking her mobile from her pocket, she scrolled down to find Lexi's number. "Lexi?" she said as soon as her friend answered, her mind whirring in excitement as she made plans for Charlie's surprise. "Portia, how are you?" "I need to ask a favour of you." "Anything. Ask away." Chapter 2. Portia. "That was a bumpier flight than I would have liked," Portia admitted as they sat in Oliver's car on their way towards the Boardwalk several days later. "But it's good to be back, don't you think, Charlie?" "Amazing." He turned his gaze from staring out of the window to face her, leaning closer and kissing her. "I still can't believe we're here again." Portia gave his hand a gentle squeeze. She was beginning to realise that Charlie wasn't the only one, excited by some time away from London. Now she thought about it, life there hadn't seemed nearly as exciting as when she initially moved there with Alistair several years before. Had she been pretending to herself about loving life in the city because Charlie had given up so much to be with her? Was all this mess her fault, after all? "You all right?" he whispered. Portia nodded. She had no idea why she hadn't thought of suggesting this trip sooner. It had taken very little persuasion for Charlie to request a week off from his job managing the plush restaurant in the city, where he had been earning a living for the past few months. Could all those sleepless nights, the occasional headaches she had been suffering from, and lack of appetite, been because she was burning herself out with the effort of trying to make everything seem perfect in their lives? Portia pushed the thought away, determined to be present and make the most of being back on the island, where they had fallen in love. The trip was important, and she needed to ensure both she and Charlie found their way back to how they had once been together. She watched as he lowered the back window fully, before taking a deep breath of the fresh sea air. "You can't beat that smell," he said wistfully. "This was a brilliant idea of yours. Thank you." Her heart contracted on hearing the joy in his voice. The light had returned to his eyes the moment she had told him about the booked flights, and that Lexi and Oliver had invited the pair of them to stay in the end cottage for their stay. "You're both welcome to come over any time. The cottage is yours until the season starts at the end of March," Oliver said, smiling at them both through his rearview mirror. Lexi twisted around in the passenger seat. "We've both been incredibly excited to see you again. I hadn't expected you to come over for a while yet, especially now winter is setting in and the weather's that much colder. I thought you'd be enjoying the Christmas lights in London and all those magical window displays I recall seeing years ago." "We'll still see those," Charlie said. "We're only here for a few days." "But we'll be able to come back again very soon," Portia reminded him, aware it might be exactly what they both needed. "For weekends, and don't forget the Christmas holidays, we'll soon be here. And yet another anniversary of Alistair's death to get through." "I thought you wanted to spend Christmas in London," Charlie asked, giving her a surprised look. "You also mentioned something about travelling to stay with friends of yours in the Cotswolds." Portia remembered being invited to stay at a friend's for the holidays earlier in the year, but she had forgotten all about it. At the time, it had seemed like a perfect way to show Charlie an English country Christmas in a characterful home. Now, though, as she looked out of the car window at the sea down the hill, she realised that a country Christmas wasn't what Charlie would enjoy most. No, she said, determined to make sure their first Christmas together was one he remembered fondly. You don't need to spend Christmas with people you don't know. Anyway, I think that now we have use of the cottage, maybe we should consider spending our Christmas here on the island with our mutual friends. As she spoke, she realised he wasn't the only one to miss the tranquillity of the island, where the only noise disturbing them at night was the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks on the beach below the boardwalk. You'd really prefer being here? Charlie's wide-eyed surprise warmed her. I can't think of a better way for us to celebrate together, can you? Charlie gazed at her in silence for a few seconds before his mouth drew back in a wide smile. No. Oliver drove slowly down the hill, indicating before turning towards their parking. Here we are, he said, switching off the car and stepping out. Portia took Charlie's hand in hers as soon as they were standing outside and closed her eyes, drawing in a deep breath. Bliss. It wasn't just the sea air filling her nostrils, or the sounds of the seagulls squawking at each other nearby. It wasn't even hearing their friends' voices as they spoke about whether to take the cases directly to their cottage, but the happiness exuding from her darling Charlie that made this moment completely perfect. Portia opened her eyes and smiled at him. Happy? Very, he whispered, before pressing his lips against hers in a kiss. I couldn't be any happier. Charlie noticed Oliver carrying both cases and withdrew his hand from hers to go and take them from him. Let me take those, Portia heard him say as she spotted Lexi lifting bags of shopping from the boot of the car. Give me some of those bags, Portia said, taking two from Lexi's hands. She waited for her friend to empty the boot and close the door, then walked with her along the pathway to the first cottage where Oliver and Lexi lived. No, Lexi said, these are for you two. Portia was a little taken aback. But you needn't have gone to the trouble, she said, trying to work out what might be in the four completely full shopping bags. Not at all. Anyway, you can't come here and have nothing to eat. But we could have gone shopping for ourselves, Portia argued, feeling guilty to have put her friend to so much trouble. She knew before entering the cottage that Lexi and Oliver would have spent time ensuring the cottage was freshly vacuumed, floors washed and everything wiped down and beds made, but hadn't expected them to buy all their food too. You've gone to so much trouble for us already. Lexi followed Oliver and Charlie into the cottage and didn't stop until she had placed the bag she was carrying onto the floor next to the kitchen cupboards. No, we haven't. You're the ones who've caught a plane and flown over here to see us. It's the very least we can do for two of our dearest friends. Portia didn't like to correct Lexi, but as far as she was concerned, it was Oliver and Lexi who had come to her rescue, and she was very grateful to them. It's fabulous being back here again, she admitted. She lowered her voice and added, I don't think I've seen Charlie this happy for months. Lexi stilled and glanced at Oliver, alerting Portia to the fact that she had said more than she meant to. Portia glanced at the small living area near the kitchen, relieved that it was only the three of them in the room. Oliver stared at her, a surprised look on his face as he knelt in front of the log burner, his hand in mid-air as he had been about to add another log into the fire. He sat back on his heels. Is everything all right between the pair of you? Horrified Charlie might be coming back downstairs after taking the cases to their bedroom, Portia shushed them both, raising a finger to her lips. Please don't say anything to him. Don't say anything about what? Charlie asked, cheerfully coming up behind her. She forced a smile before turning to him and slipped her arms around his waist. I was talking about Christmas presents, she fibbed. Now, let's change the subject and open one of these bottles of red wine I've spotted in the bag over there. You guys sit down. Portia and I will get the drinks, Lexi said, walking to the bag and lifting one of the bottles of red wine from it and placing it onto the worktop. The corkscrew is in that drawer there, she said, indicating one to their left. Portia was grateful Charlie appeared to believe her and gave Lexi an appreciative smile. Thank you, she whispered, opening the drawer and taking the corkscrew from it. I seem to recall the glasses are up in this cupboard. She reached up, opened the door and took out 4, setting them down next to the bottle. The groceries put away and wine poured, Lexi put crisps and nuts into 2 bowls, and took everything through to the living area, where the women settled down onto the comfy sofa. "Here's to a relaxing few days on the island," Portia said, raising her glass in a toast. "Hear, hear," Charlie said, blowing her a kiss. "This place is really cosy." "We're glad you think so," Lexi said. "We want your stay here to be perfect." "If it carries on this way," Charlie laughed, "then it's sure to be. Don't you think, Portia?" "Absolutely." She took a sip of the rich liquid and sat back into the deep cushions, letting the concern about Charlie's recent quietness melt away. She watched him speaking to her friends, relieved she had come up with the idea to visit them and spend time near the sea again. She listened to Charlie talking animatedly about what it meant to him to be back on the island, and couldn't help thinking how much at home he seemed in this pretty cottage. "What are your plans for tomorrow?" Oliver asked eventually. Charlie gave Portia a questioning look. "I don't think we've thought that far yet. I was so taken aback by Portia booking the flights that all I could think of was how happy I was to be coming home again." Portia suspected the first thing he would hope to do was visit friends down on the boardwalk. "I have an idea," she said. "Great." Charlie grinned. "What is it?" "I thought we could start the day by walking down the hill to Summer Sundaes Cafe for one of Sasha's delicious full English breakfasts." "I like that idea," Charlie nodded. "Go on, what's next?" "We could take a stroll to Boardwalk Books maybe, and see what Jules has been getting up to, before walking to Bella's cottage and having a look at what antiques she's got on display in her little front room shop." "Sounds good to me." He narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. "We could finish off our morning by taking off our shoes and walking barefoot on the beach. How does that sound?" Charlie gazed at her, with so much love in his eyes that for a moment Portia almost agreed. "I like the idea of the beach walk," she admitted, laughing, "although I can't commit to taking off my shoes, not when it's this cold." Charlie smiled. "All right. We'll keep our shoes on then." He really was incredibly happy being here, she thought, hating the idea that they were only on the island. "I think that sounds exactly like what I would have chosen to do," Oliver agreed. Portia took a sip of her drink. "Then that's what we'll do." "There's an autumn market down at Derelict Barracks," Oliver added. "You could pop in there before walking back up to the cottage. You might find a few bits you like." "Great idea," Charlie agreed. "I'll have a look to see if the cider maker is there, with his stall. That's delicious stuff, I seem to recall." "And don't miss the artisan baker, Remy," Lexi added. "Oliver loves his sourdough loaves. But if you're not a sourdough fan, Remy sells loads of other types of bread." "That sounds like my thing," Portia said, deciding that was where she would be heading to. Charlie sighed happily, and Portia watched as he sat quietly, lost in his own thoughts. "This is the perfect treat," he said eventually. "I know we're going to have a wonderful few days." "I think so too," Portia said, closing her eyes and relishing the relaxed atmosphere between them as he pulled her into his arms for a hug. It's good to be back here again. It really was, she thought. Glad that she had no charity commitments that weekend and was able to act upon her instinct to book the flights to the island. Charlie hadn't been the only one needing a break from the tension of their London lives. Chapter 3. Charlie. Charlie opened his eyes, confused for a moment when he heard the sound of the sea. A seagull squawked somewhere outside, and he sighed happily, remembering they were back in Jersey. Portia's soft breathing interrupted his thoughts. He turned on his side, careful not to wake her, wanting to watch her angelic face as she slept peacefully next to him. He noted the time on his watch and realised he had slept for over 8 hours, without waking once during the night. Charlie didn't think he had slept so deeply or for so long the entire time he had been living in London. Returning to the tranquillity of his adopted coastal village, surrounded by the fresh sea air, was clearly what he needed. Portia stirred, and he lay on his side watching her, his head resting on his arm. She really was the most exquisite woman, and it still surprised him that she loved him so much. It was strange to think that 3 years earlier, Portia had faced the loss of her fiancé, Alistair, when he had been killed in an accident. Charlie knew she had only come to the island for the first time the previous Christmas to find solace with Oliver, as she was unable to face the 2nd anniversary of Alistair's death alone. Oliver missed his brother as much as Portia did, and Charlie knew their bond was very deep. He thought of his own brother, and the distance between them since he had left New Zealand to move back to Jersey 9 years ago, leaving his mother heartbroken. Charlie still felt guilty about emigrating, but maybe if his parents hadn't sent him to stay for an entire summer with his great-aunt in Jersey when he was 16, he might not have fallen in love with the place and decided to live there as soon as he was old enough to leave home. But since spending that idyllic summer in Jersey, it had been his brother's envy of him that had continued the discord between them. He glanced at his bedside table drawer, inside which he had placed the solicitor's letter that had come for him 2 days earlier. He knew Portia had picked up that something was wrong and felt guilty for not sharing his news with her yet, but he still needed a little more time to process what this unexpected bequest meant for him. Portia murmured Charlie's name in her sleep. He stroked her temple lightly with the tip of his finger. "It's all right, sweetheart," he soothed. "I'm right here." Charlie was glad she had Oliver to turn to over the past few years. She could be very independent and self-sufficient, but there was something broken about her that compelled him to want to protect her. Not that he ever let her know that, he thought, smiling to himself. Portia would hate for him to think she wasn't perfectly capable of looking after herself. Charlie also knew Portia had not expected to make such close friends when she came to Jersey that first time, or fall in love again. He hadn't ever imagined someone glamorous and sophisticated like Portia could possibly fall for someone as ordinary as him. He was a very lucky man, and he knew it. Why then did life in London seem so difficult to navigate? He desperately wanted his new life with her to work out, but despite his, and he realised her best efforts, living where everyone seemed to be a stranger, focusing only on reaching whatever destination they were heading for, proved more of a struggle than he had expected. In Jersey, it didn't matter how long his shifts at the hotel were. He could always take a moment to look outside at the waves lapping at the water's edge on the beach below, or open a window to hear the sea, watch the many birds on the cliffs to the right of the bay. In London, the only sounds were of tense voices and traffic. In Jersey, his commute had been a short, peaceful stroll along the boardwalk, stopping several times to chat to one of the other locals, whereas in London, he was one of thousands of anonymous people, making their way along the underground passageways to crowded platforms, rushing to catch the train that would take each of them to work. And now there was this new turn of events, and it made him feel even more unsettled than before. Portia stirred and took a slow, deep breath before stretching as she slowly opened her eyes. Charlie watched as she stared up at the ceiling for a few seconds, probably listening to the sound of the waves and trying to work out where she was, as he had done. He saw her mouth slowly draw back into a smile before she closed her eyes again. Charlie felt his heart contract with emotion as he witnessed her reaction to waking up on the island. She probably assumed he was still sleeping and decided to wait patiently to see what she did next. Her hand found his thigh, making him hold his breath. Portia smiled, then opened her eyes and looked at him. "Good morning. Have you been staring at me for long?" "Not. I slept so well." She stretched languorously. "Me too. Then again, I always sleep better when I'm near the sea," he said, gazing at her. "But mostly I'm happy as waking up next to you." He saw something flash across her face. Doubt, maybe? Not wanting her to worry, he settled back down next to her, happy when Portia snuggled up closer to him. Her hand moved higher up his thigh, and Charlie pulled her to him, kissing her. An hour later, showered and dressed for the cold weather they knew would greet them outside, Charlie took Portia's gloved hand in his as they began their walk down to Summer Sundaes Cafe. "I'm looking forward to my breakfast," she said, her stomach rumbling in protest. "How about you?" "Definitely. I think I might have even dreamed about eating there last night." He enjoyed being with someone who loved her food as much as he did. He gazed at her, knowing he needed to tell her about the solicitor's letter he had received, especially now they were in Jersey, and he had little time to make an appointment to visit the law office before they left to return to London. Hearing voices, Charlie noticed a few locals already chatting on the boardwalk, despite it still being fairly early. He wasn't surprised. This might be a holiday destination in the summer, but it was still a working village the rest of the year. "Charlie, is that you?" Tony, a fisherman friend he knew well, waved at them. "That's the man who married Bella's mother the previous spring, isn't it?" "Yes, that's Tony." Charlie waved back at the well-built man with a hand on each of his children's shoulders. The little boy and girl seemed happy and had grown since he had last seen them at Tony and Claire's beach wedding. "Back for good, I hope?" He felt Portia's hand tense briefly in his own. He hated to think she was unsettled by Tony's question. but it was a natural thing for anyone to ask him. He hesitated slightly before answering, not wishing to upset her by saying the wrong thing. "No, we're just here for a brief visit this time." "That's a shame. Hopefully we'll have time for a catch-up before you leave again." "I'd like that." Portia gave a friendly wave. Charlie knew she liked most of the residents she met here. Then again, they were a friendly, close-knit bunch of people, and unlike where she lived in London, seemed to look out for and knew each other's names. "I might see you both in the cafe, if you're still there when I've dropped the kids off at their sports club." "That would be lovely," Charlie said. "Bring Claire if you can," Portia suggested. "I'd love to catch up with her while we're here." "She's in town for the day visiting a friend." "Bella still hand modelling?" Portia asked, picturing the bubbly girl who was one of Lexi's closest friends, and her mother, Claire, who, she recalled, had only returned to Jersey the previous year, having spent most of her daughter's life away, trying to find herself in various far-flung locations across the globe, while Bella was being brought up by her grandmother. "She is, but hasn't done much these past few months. Been focusing on sorting out her antiques to give a bit more space in the living room for when the baby arrives." Portia thought of the pretty blue cottage halfway along the boardwalk, where Bella lived with Jack and sold antiques from her. "I'd better get going. Don't want these two to be late for training." Charlie and Portia walked on again towards the cafe, stopping at the iron railings in front of the beach to take in the breathtaking view. Charlie took a slow, deep breath and sighed happily. "Nothing beats the smell of the sea." Portia did the same. "I have to agree with you. It certainly beats the smell of the exhaust fumes on our street at home." Her stomach rumbled noisily, making Charlie laugh. "Come on, let's get some food in us." They entered the warm, bright cafe, and he immediately felt like he hadn't been away. The scent of breakfasts, toast and ground coffee filled the air. Charlie spotted a vacant table and led her over to it. "That was lucky," Portia said, sitting opposite him. "I hadn't expected it to be this busy yet, and certainly not in November." "Portia? Charlie? What are you two doing here?" Sasha beamed at them. She grabbed 2 menus and hurried to them, turning her notepad onto a fresh page. Charlie liked how delighted the cafe owner was to see them again. They didn't have a chance to answer the question before Sasha shouted over her shoulder for her brother. "Jack! Look who's here!" "Hey, mate." Charlie stood and turned towards the kitchen as Jack came over to join them. Jack hugged Charlie, patting his back before going to Portia and bending to kiss her cheek. "I hope you've both seen the error of your ways and are back for good," he said, looking from one of them to the other. Charlie winced. It was the second time in less than 5 minutes that someone had made such a comment. He noticed Portia smiled tightly as she took the menu from Sasha. "Just ignore him," Sasha said, shooting a glare at her twin. "He's got the tact of I'm not sure what." "It's fine," Portia insisted. "It's lovely to know we've been missed." "Sorry, Jack," Charlie apologised, sitting down again. "We're only back for a few days, but hopefully we'll be able to meet up for a chat. I'd love to know what's been going on since we were last here." Jack raised a finger. "I'll keep you to that." 2 more people entered the cafe. "I'd better look after these 2. It's great to see you, though. Both of you." "Good to see you too," Charlie and Portia replied in unison. Sasha pointed to a blackboard on the wall to Portia's side. "We've got everything on the menu and those specials up there. Give me a wave when you've had a chance to make up your minds." As Sasha walked away, Portia reached out and took Charlie's right hand in hers. "I'm sorry, Charlie." "What for?" "Your friends have obviously missed you very much." "They've missed you too." Portia looked at him doubtfully. "Maybe a bit, but not like they have you. I feel bad that you left all this behind for me." He took her hands across the table, determined to reassure her. "Listen, I left here to be with the woman I love. I'm happy wherever you are. I hope you know that." "I do," she said, a catch in her voice. "But I know that ideally you'd rather be here near—" She grinned. "And you can't go swimming whenever you wish in London either." "I could find somewhere," he argued, "but maybe not in the sea." He frowned. "Anyway, there's much more to life than that. I'm fine. You do believe me when I say that, I hope?" She stared at him for a moment, and he wondered what was going through her mind. "I do, but we both know you'd be happier living back on the island." "I'm happy being wherever you are," he insisted, wishing he didn't have to tell her about the letter. If she was unsettled now, how was she going to feel when he told her his news? "Let's order, shall we?" he said, wanting to change the subject and lifting one of her hands to his mouth before kissing it. I'm starving, and you haven't had your first cup of tea yet. Portia raised his hand to her lips. You're the loveliest man, do you know that? I'm glad you think so, he said, teasing her and hoping that she'd let the matter drop. I do. Right, let's order. As they ate, he could tell she was trying her best to be cheerful. Charlie focused on enjoying his full English breakfast and coffee, but although Portia looked as if she was enjoying her pancakes with blueberries and maple syrup, which he knew from experience were delicious, somehow today she didn't seem as enthused as usual and appeared to be having to force herself to finish them. He couldn't remain quiet a moment longer. Charlie lowered his cutlery to his plate. Sweetheart, I know you're determined to give me a perfect few days here, but I need to know you're enjoying yourself too and not spending your time worrying about me. Portia stared to her right out of the large window, where locals walked between them and the rough jade sea below the promenade. I just can't help feeling guilty that you've given all this up to be with me. She looked into his eyes, and Charlie knew she was about to bring up the one thing he tried to avoid discussing with her. Regardless of how you insist otherwise, Charlie, I know you've become increasingly miserable living in London. Charlie gritted his teeth. Damn, he had tried so hard to hide his feelings and had presumed he was doing a reasonable job. Obviously, he had failed spectacularly. Charlie, I know something's wrong. What I don't understand is why you won't share your concerns with me. She looked hurt, and Charlie hated that he was the cause. He was going to have to tell her about the solicitor's letter. There was nothing else for it. But then, knowing Portia, she would insist they return to live on the island, and he couldn't let her leave her beloved home, just because of his circumstances. He still needed to tell her, though, and sooner rather than later. Charlie, please tell me what's wrong. He took her hands in each of his. Fine, but I want you to let me tell you everything before you react. Promise? She nodded slowly, looking pale. Go on then. He cleared his throat. Firstly, anyway, he added, aware she didn't seem convinced, I don't mind living in London. Charlie, we both know that's not true. Portia stared at him for a moment. This wasn't going to be as easy as he had hoped. I admit I prefer living here, but London has its bonuses. Portia laughed. Go on then. Tell me some of them. He shrugged. Theatres, nightclubs, and lots of parks. Fair enough. She smiled. Sorry, I interrupted. Carry on. He withdrew the letter from his solicitor from his coat pocket and handed it to her to read. What's this? She glanced from him to the letter. I received it in the post a couple of days ago. She took the letter and glanced up at him questioningly before studying the envelope. Why haven't you told me about it sooner? What is it about? Read it and you'll see, he replied softly. As she read, Charlie thought of his mother never missing an opportunity to take a snipe at his dad for insisting they left Jersey to emigrate to New Zealand when his business went bust. Charlie and his older brother had only been young, but he had grown up aware of his father's mortification and regret at letting his family down so badly that he felt the need to take them to the other side of the world, far from everything he and his mother knew, and where no one would know their circumstances. He realised Portia was staring at him. You've inherited a chateau? Here? Charlie nodded. It's more of a manor house, I think, but yes, that's right. You've never mentioned a great-aunt before, have you? He wasn't sure. She was a recluse. I've visited her occasionally, but not for a few years now. But what will you do with it? Charlie sighed. I've no idea, he said honestly. It's very run down now, I imagine. He laughed. It was in a bad shape when my parents sent me here for the summer, when I was 16. Portia looked stunned. Was that when you first came back to the island, after your parents emigrated when you were 7? That's right. I fell in love with the place and was heartbroken when they insisted I return to them. She reached out and took his hand in hers. But you came back as soon as you left uni, didn't you? He had. It had been the longest 6 years of his life, but he knew he needed to attend university in New Zealand because his parents hadn't had enough money to send him to a British university. Portia stared at him thoughtfully for a moment. Do you think your father would have ever returned here if he'd lived longer? Charlie had often wondered the same thing, but not for long. No, he was too ashamed about going broke to ever want to face people who knew him back then. My mother always insisted she would come back as soon as possible, but when Dad had his heart attack and died, she remarried months later, and now I can't see her ever coming back. What do you think? All Charlie did know for certain was that he had no intention of repeating his father's mistakes. He couldn't bear to be the cause of any resentment between himself and Portia. She loved her life in London, and if he was to ensure she remained happy, then he needed to find a way to settle there happily too. I'm not sure what I'll do with it yet, he replied, wanting time to figure out how best to deal with this unexpected gift. Chapter 4. Portia. You are both still here, Oliver said, joining them at the table with Lexi by his side. I didn't see you come in. Portia wasn't sure if she was relieved or disappointed for her and Charlie's conversation to be cut short. She needed time to mull over his news. No wonder she hadn't been able to shift the sense that something had been bothering Charlie for the past couple of days. We thought we'd pop in to see if you were here. She smiled, happy to see her dear Oliver. He always ended up being there when she needed him most. You seemed lost in thought just then. Did I? Oliver knew her far too well to misread her mood. I was just thinking how beautiful the sea is when it's this stormy. I love it this dramatic and wild. That is rather impressive, isn't it? Oliver said, glancing over his shoulder for a quick look out of the window. No wonder you didn't see us. You joining us? Charlie asked, pulling out the seat next to him for Lexi to take. We've eaten already, but Oliver wondered if you might like to go with him and meet up with Tony and Jack for a coffee and a catch-up. I was hoping to take Portia to the artisan market just over the road from where you'll be. Portia? Charlie's eyebrows raised in question. Would that be okay with you? Of course. She smiled at Lexi gratefully. I was also hoping to pop in to see Jules and then Bella sometime this morning and say hello. Jules is away with Marius in London, Sasha said, arriving next to their table, holding 2 plates of food. They're meeting someone about a proposed exhibition in the spring. How typical that they're there when we've come here, Portia shrugged, disappointed at the timing. Will they be back in the next couple of days, do you know? Unfortunately not, Jack said. They're having a mini-break afterwards at some Airbnb. I think they needed a little time, just the 2 of them, before the run-up to Christmas gets going. I see. Portia hoped her disappointment didn't show on her face. We'll just have to make a plan to visit again soon then, so we can catch up with them then. Bella says she'll try and join us in a bit.